Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching us on YouTube and you want to learn more about what we do here, you can visit us at officehours.global. Our first hour, we answer your questions on media and virtual events, and this is a perfect opportunity to our producers to go ahead and submit your questions now. Our second hour, something that we want to spend a little bit more time on, and today we're going to be talking about budgets. That part of project planning that might not always be fun, but it is critical, especially if you run a business and want to make sure that your project is profitable. If you want to learn more about the schedule for the rest of the week, go ahead and visit officehours.global. And it's time for us to start the show. Let's go, Bill.
Thanks, Liberty. Our first question this morning comes from Michael Forrest in London in the UK. Many people have asked me to add budget remote control to my Shoot iOS webcam app. Would you use this feature? And if so, what would you use it for? And there's a link there.
Go ahead, Alex.
I think it's a great idea. So what this looks like, I was able to research it. I wasn't able to obviously get it working, but was looking through what Michael had posted. And I think that what's really interesting is that with some of the other apps that we've done this with remote control, we are using another phone or another device, and that sometimes can be limiting if you don't have a few of them. And so this looks like a link that's going to allow you to actually control a phone through a web browser. So you just need to have that connection between the web browsers. So now you can change your exposure, you can change your color, white balance, et cetera, from there. So I think it's actually a really interesting solution for a lot of folks. I think you could use it if you're using Shoot as a webcam. So I think that's and also just for general training. So I think it's a really interesting feature to add.
Next question.
Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California is up next. He says, ATEM Mini original that feeds video to iMAG from a video splitters to a projector. All the frame rates match as well as the ATEM settings. He's unplugged inputs 2 and 3, and now he gets black video. Program out through HDMI. Video shows everything's okay on the other monitors. Any ideas for troubleshooting?
Go ahead, Courtney.
This smells suspiciously like an HDCP problem. If you have an input that's plugged into that ATEM that is a Blu-ray player or something else like a Chromecast or something that could play back copyrighted material and have HDCP enabled, that can shut down the HDMI outputs because it's not HDCP compliant. So if those splitters are not removing, a lot of times people use those splitters going in to remove HDCP. Maybe your splitters aren't removing the HDCP or something that you have plugged in, like maybe the projector is requiring an HDCP handshake before it will enable the output. That could be too. So you may have to strip off HDCP, find you some splitters that do that, and try again. That seems like it, without looking at the specific hookup and what's hooked up and where it's hooked up and how, in what order it's hooked up, you can't really go farther than that to investigate that.
Thanks, Courtney. Mitchell?
Courtney has good advice. One other tip, don't plug or unplug an HDMI on a live ATEM. Make sure you power it down first before you do that. It might be part of your problem.
And Bill?
And along the lines of what Mitch is just suggesting, sometimes these devices are polling all of their ports constantly, and if they're used to seeing something on 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you suddenly remove the content on 2 and 3, they could go, wait a second, what's going on? Why don't I see anything anymore? And kind of get locked up on that. So if nothing else, I would, if you make a port change like that, reboot. And I think Mitch had better idea, shut down before you unplug them and then reboot with what's actually there.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Nick Pavlinek in Southeast Michigan, and he says, Guy, what would you suggest for the lowest price PTZ 20X optical zoom camera, indoor, and then external with the weather housing?
Go ahead, Guy.
That's a tough one because it depends on what you want to do with the cabling, because there's SDI, HDMI, USB, NDI, so it depends on where it's actually going to. And then lowest price, it's kind of crazy because on the outdoor cameras, I haven't had a chance to test these ones here, these Gen 2. I mean, you're talking big money. This is like $7,999, and this one doesn't have like the windshield wiper. So like the bigger ones, like this one, and again, not cheap at all, $17,950 for this Panasonic 20X, and it's got the windshield wiper. So it depends on what you want to do, and again, the cabling, if you need to go SDI or something else, they'll do SRT and things like that. So I would take a look at those two, the Bird Dog and the Panasonic.
Nice. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallus in Austin, Texas, and he says, Amazon buys iRobot and or Roomba. What could possibly go wrong? And let the jokes begin.
Go ahead, Mitchell. And Mitchell would be the first one.
I'm the jokester. The Roomba could start delivering Amazon packages. That could be the first problem.
Okay, Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to say that they can use it for same-day delivery. In my neighborhood, we have Postmates robots that roam up and down the streets constantly, and I'm constantly, when I go out for a walk, having to, joust with them on the sidewalk for space, because they stop when you come toward them, and you start to move, and then they start to move. And it's that's what's next. Probably going to have to be stepping over Roombas going everywhere with little packages strapped to their backs.
Nigel?
Yeah, obviously everyone is talking about the mapping of the houses, but I'm much more concerned that there's all sorts of products that iRobot make that we don't know about, military robots and things like that. So I would think this is the next step in Skynet. That would be particularly where I would place my concern.
And Alex?
Well, I really think that Amazon is going to really clean up with this investment.
Where are our sound effects?
Who has the rim shot?
I had to say it. I think that this may not have this. What Amazon likes to do is solve its own problems, but have other people pay for it. So, that's what AWS is basically, is we needed to do all these things and we'll have somebody else underwrite it. And so Roomba has a lot of, they have a lot of other things, and they have money coming in to support the technology movement forward, which is a really great model for Amazon. This may have more to do with Amazon's warehouses than it has to do. This investment is more to do with, how they're managing their warehouses than being interested in mapping our houses. I don't think that really is that. I don't think that's nearly as useful to Amazon as people think it is. But I think that figuring out how to, they've had injury issues with some of the robots and so on and so forth. And Roomba obviously has been doing this for a very long time. So mapping a floor and understanding exactly, what it can and can't do, I think is probably closer to what Amazon's looking for than more data about our houses.
And Bill?
I suspect this acquisition was merely so Amazon can get a hold of Roomba's patented pet frightening technology. And it's going to go crazy.
And Courtney?
Yeah, and I just thought of something, Alex. If they incorporate the Roomba technology into their warehouse robots that they already have that move those big racks of stuff around, they can clean the warehouse floor at the same time.
Exactly. It'll be very, very, they will have the cleanest warehouses ever. But this is a massive issue for the warehouse. Automation is probably one of the biggest challenges for Amazon over the next decade.
And back to you, Bill.
I just want to do, on a serious note, I really do think there's going to be some realignment here, because Roombas and things in that classification used to be one of the biggest sellers on like the QVCs and the home shopping networks. Amazon is going to take a little run at some of those direct sellers. If Amazon makes this exclusive and changes the distribution system, we may be seeing a realignment of the retail kind of home delivery space here, and that could be a big deal.
Very much so. That's a good point there, Bill. I'm just going to bring in the chat Kyle. Kyle Hammond appreciated that joke, so thank you for that, Kyle. And Roscoe Jones says, your dust will be examined and ads will be thusly targeted. So we'll see how that pans out. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Up next, the big Constellation controllers aren't available, so I'm testing a Tricaster controller and Central Control. It's finicky, likes to freeze with the Hyperdeck. I have no other connections on the Hyperdeck. Any ideas?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'd reach out to Joe DeMax. He's the writer of Central Control. He's very responsive, and see if there's anything that he would recommend. So that'd be number one. Number two would be to also look at the Scarhoy controllers. So they have the Mega Panel, some of these that might do the same thing if you can't get what you want right now. These are flowing, so that's something to look at if you want rack versions, or if you just got tons of different ones. I myself have played with this little Airfly one, and it's amazing. But there's also these master keys. Yeah, it depends on if you need any kind of like joystick control. This PTZ Extreme one I've also tested. It's really cool. So lots of stuff in the Scarhoy world. And then as far as the panels go, I would probably reach out to me. I just put a message into my distributor, and there's a 20 and then there's a new 30 key. So it depends on which one you're looking for in the 2ME range. We might be able to not get the 20 right now, but the 30 might be coming online here shortly, if not already in the warehouse.
Go ahead, Alex.
That's a new ATEM panel with 30 keys instead of 20. Whoop, can't hear you. Okay.
You're on mute, Guy.
Yeah, there was an advanced panel that was announced a while back that has the 30 key that should be flowing into the channel. Now, I haven't seen one in the warehouse, so I don't know when it's coming in. Got it.
Yeah. And I would definitely not try to run a show through central control. I think central control is really powerful, and we use it to connect. We've used it in projects to connect a lot of different things. But the kind of action that you're asking for is not something that I would try to do. so that's my, I think that this Guy's suggestion of Scarhoy is a much better solution if you're looking for something right now. But unless Guy can help you get a 2ME.
You mentioned that before, Alex. I feel like I've heard you saying just when to use central control. Like you said specifically here, the kind of action that he's trying to do.
It's just a lot of fast actions. It's a lot of fast actions with a lot of, and those are the kind of things that we haven't been successful with central control. What we have been very successful with is tying a bunch of things together, sending, commands to a lot of things to have them do what they need to do. But if we were going to actually try to cut a show with a lot of really close relays, it's probably not the thing that we would use central control from the experiences that I've had so far. When we use it, it is the only thing that you could use to make that happen. But using it to tie one switcher surface to another switcher is asking it to do something that I don't think that it's really built for.
Got it. Thank you. Next question.
Dave Burke in Alexandria, Virginia. Up next, run us through the Zoom settings checklist, please. What are the best settings for sharing both video and screen content via our Zoom video channel?
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, it depends. So I think that there's a lot of things that you have to kind of look at here. One is, are you using a meeting or a webinar? Because those are going to have a variety of different settings. You want to make sure that original audio is available. You want to make sure that you're approved for 1080p or at least 720p. Those are key options there. Obviously, allowing people to screen share is a useful thing to have when you're doing this. So those are some of the key ones, and then you have to decide: am I going to allow people to chat? In the function, am I allowing them to turn on their audio and video on their own? Those are other things to look at there. As far as sharing video, remember that when you do a share screen. So when you do a screen share, you're basically saying, I would like to prioritize resolution over frame rate. And so basically what will happen is the screen share, unless you say optimized for video, which is kind of the same as you just turning your video on, the screen share will be, it can be a lot of high resolutions, but it'll be a low frame rate. That may work it's built for presentations. It's not built for you to play video. If you're going to play video, in my opinion, you're going to get the best frame rate from sharing it into a window, so having some kind of interface, whether it's an ATEM or something else that is going to allow you to just play video into your system, as opposed to using a screen share to make that happen. The only advantage of using the screen share with optimized for video is that it changes the state of the viewer. So if you're watching a webinar, it means that if you use the screen share with optimized video, it's going to throw a whole window. It's going to fill up that window and put all the panelists to one side and put it in a full screen. So it changes that state in a way that it won't change necessarily when you're doing it with just sharing it to your screen.
And Mickey has said something in the comment here to Dave, go through every single setting on every single panel on both WebAdmin and the client app. It takes about 5 minutes. So that's a good way to just also familiarize yourself with it and creating your own checklist that works for your workflow. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Paul Wallace again in Austin, Texas. And he says, I have a 32 square grid on my Note 9, and it won't go away after half an hour of brainstorming on after hours. Any ideas?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, those little squares are caused by brainstorming on after hours. No, I think what you have turned on there is something called icons with frames. So if you go to settings, and let's see if I can bring this up here, icons with frames, search for frames or icon frames, and there's a setting that says icons with frames, and unselect that, just select icons only, and see if that makes it go away. I'm not sure that's exactly what your problem is, but that sounds kind of like what's going on.
Next question.
Vipan Abraham of Pune, looks like India, says, facing audio issues using an M1 Mac Mini in production. Noise on the input when sending audio from the Mini to the X32 from the 3.5 millimeter to RCA. It sounds like a grounding issue. The Mac Mini doesn't have a ground pin on the same circuit, and a 1 meter cable run is what he's looking at there.
Jason?
I'll answer the question as asked first. You need a DI box. It's that simple. I've found decently good luck with, the Rapco Horizon LT GL box. But really, you should just be using a Dante card or an external sound card where you can filter the audio and actually get 3 pins out.
Mitchell?
Yeah, it's not so much about the pins as it, like Jason just said, it needs to be balanced. And you're running unbalanced into balance, so you're essentially just grounding part of the one of the inputs, which is bad. A DI box, I recommend the Henry. They have a nice little bidirectional one. It'll get you audio back and forth, either direction.
And Alex?
Yeah, in a lot of events that we've worked on, that little buzz that you're hearing, that ground is indicative of both converters as well as DI boxes. Anything that's unbalanced at any point in time is your enemy. You need to find a way to go from USB to balanced. What we've used the most, and this isn't the cheapest thing, is a USB Pre 2, but there are other interfaces. They just have to have a balanced output. There are some Behringer interfaces that are less than $200. There are a variety of ones, but they have to have a USB connection to your computer and a XL, either a TRS or XLR output or both that are out from there that you can send from the computer. But you really, in a true presentation that matters, you should never use the 3.5 millimeter jack. Ever, ever, never, 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 ever, never, never. You got to keep that in order, but never do that. Like it is a recipe for disaster.
And Courtney?
Never, ever go after Alex when he says never, ever, never, ever. No, I agree with exactly what Alex says. Get a USB interface. And sometimes the cheaper interfaces are a little bit hard to find with balanced outputs. They will have balanced inputs for microphones, but a lot of times they won't have balanced outputs. They'll just have headphone outputs and high impedance outputs. So you may have to look around to find a USB I/O that will connect to that iMac and give you balanced outputs, and plug that into the X32.
And I just have to say, like, literally, if I hear that buzz, the first thing that I do in an event is I track down the presentation person and just look at what they have, and it's always a DI box. Like it's always like it's their headphone jack into something. It's just so hard. I mean, I think that it's very traditional, and a lot of people use it. And in a good environment, like someone like Jason could probably have his environment set up in a way that would work. So I think he's accurate in that, but it takes a lot of work. And in an event environment, it's very hard to have the environment, have everything set up in a way that works.
Next question.
Our next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asks, what would be the most streamlined way to implement a bidirectional MIDI-to-OSC gateway to a mixing console that does not support Zoom OSC?
Go ahead, Jason.
At the end of the day, it depends. But I'd say you'd have best luck with Companion Pi running on a Raspberry Pi that you could actually tie the functions that you needed together to whatever the MIDI command is that you'd need.
And Alex?
If you're trying to do anything that looks at all like full control over a mixer, if it doesn't support OSC, you're going to have a hard time. Like it's just not like, again, you can ask mixers to do certain things, but really having the resolution that you need is going to be very difficult through any kind of interface protocol unless they have a full protocol that's published, which a lot of them don't. If they don't have OSC, they generally don't have a published API.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine from Panama is up next. Started building my flykit inspired by office hours. Do you include the processing PCs and or Macs to the flykit, or is that something separated from the media box? And he's thinking on adding some beelinks. By Courtney.
Go ahead, Courtney.
That's a good. I've switched from beelink to these MeLEs. They're fanless. The beelinks have a little tiny fan in them, and if you have a mic open in front of your little your flykit, you may hear them. These are completely silent. This is called the Quieter 3, and the Quieter 3 has a newer from MeLE. And the Quieter 3 has a newer processor in it, the 5105, which has double the graphics processing of the previous Quieter 2. So it works quite a bit better. It's got 24 graphics processing units, has 2 HDMI 2.0 outputs, so it can drive 2 4K monitors at 60. It has analog I/O for audio and 4 USB 3 ports, so plenty of ports. You can lash this down inside your case easily or mount it on the wall. Just make sure you don't block the little ribs on the top because it's passively cooled. It's going to get extremely warm because it has to cool with convection. And don't put it above something else that's generating heat. Otherwise, you may have thermal problems. But I've run this with 18 videos playing back on it all day long, and it hasn't thermal throttled. So that's really a good sign. That's what I would suggest. And this is what I've been putting in my flykits.
Go ahead, Jason.
It's a little less space efficient, but typically my flykits involve 2 specific racks, one of which involves at least 1 or 2 Mac Minis. I find that they are just the very best glue when it comes to getting things to do, whatever I need specifically on the road.
And Alex.
I just want to know if Courtney has told beelink that they're no longer using them. I mean, that there could be a lot of upset there. I mean, I'm just saying, do they know? Do they know, Courtney, that you have the news? How do you spell MeLE?
MELE.
MELE. Okay, great. Anyway, and like Jason, I use a lot of Mac Minis, although I've been looking at using the beelinks and now the MeLEs, to do some glue as well, just for some of the stuff that we're working on. I mean, I think that they can definitely produce it. What is the cost of those MeLEs, Courtney?
Yeah, I think the Quieter 3's around, you can usually get a discount of about $30, so I think they're $260. With a discount, they're $230.
Yeah, so for a lot of really base things.
That includes 8K of RAM and 128K of...
8K of RAM?
Of SSD. Excuse me, 8 megabytes.
Yeah.
I'll never use that.
8 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, 8 gigabytes. The thing is, some of us are old enough to remember when 8K was like,
that's right.
I got 8K.
Yes.
Yeah, my Apple IIe is going to rock this. Anyway, so anyway, one of the things we're looking at for office hours, for instance, there was a request to play some music at the end, and we need a player. And I was talking to Tlaloc over the weekend, and I think that it may make sense for us just to have something like the MeLE with something like Isadora. Just load it up there and just have it waiting for a command to go play. So those are all things that could be relatively easy. So those little less expensive PCs, although I use a lot of Mac Minis as glue, and they're a lot more powerful. But you have to really look at what do you need for this one operation, and I think that might be a good solution.
And Guy.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring this up because just yesterday I was trying to figure out how to do this. So I went on Amazon and looked, because I have this one here, the beelink no longer by Courtney, the GTR one.
The new title, beelink no longer by Courtney.
Right. Beelink once by Courtney.
This one was actually pretty powerful, but not powerful enough to run vMix the way that I wanted to, but I still want to use it to control this Netgear AV line switch and just anything else that happens. It'd be nice to put it in the rack. So typically the one that we stock and carry and put in our one-button studio are these. We go through a ton of these. So this is what it looks like when you load up 2 Mac Minis inside of this 19-inch rack, and then you get USB on the front, and it just, they work. You know, they're super solid, and so that's what they look like with the fan, and nice build there. So if you find something for a beelink, though, I can find a way that the things that they had were meant for like TVs, or mounting them to the back of a TV, like in a Starbucks type, you know, monitor for menus and things like that. But yeah, the Sonnet with a Mac Mini would be the way that I would go for a flat pack.
Nice. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York. Scott says, going to be streaming a music event from a location with fragile internet, 50 megabits a second up at best. Which platform would have the most forgiving buffer to keep the stream solid?
Go ahead, Guy.
I haven't used this platform yet, but it's called Resi, and they have some forward error correction stuff going on that would allow you to increase the buffer by a long ways. So basically, it's really checking those bits and making sure that it's getting everything and putting a long buffer in there. The other thing that I think Alex is probably going to recommend, but using Zixi and being able to drop down to a low megabit, that Zixi codec is able to really throttle down when it sees that there's a low bandwidth. The one that I personally would use, though, is the Pearl Nano with HEVC. That way you can, let's say you had a 3 meg signal in H.264, you could drop down to 1.5. And so when you have fragile internet and you're able to drop down to 1.5 and still get 1080, I mean, it's pretty amazing. So having a good encoder. The thing is that this is SRT, so you do need something up at the other end, because you won't be able to just push SRT HEVC right into YouTube. So you do need to send it somewhere like Teradek has Core. We'll use AWS. There's a number of services like Teradek Core. There's one more that's, I can't remember the name of it. It'll hit me here in a minute. But yeah, find a way to transcode it up in the cloud. There's another service by Livestream. If you're using Livestream, they can do it as well with their service. So you might want to look at the software, but test. That's the recommendation.
And Alex.
Yeah, in these environments, I just was talking to someone who was in a very challenging, much less bandwidth than 50 up, using the Link, and was very successful, actually using the Link and Unity and a bunch of other things. The big thing is Zixi is able to flex. What we find is that Zixi is able to flex better than anything else that we've seen. And so it's a much better solution when you just don't know. Now, other things you need to think about at 50 meg. So to follow that up, Elemental Link is what I use for a lot of those types of things. What's nice about it is you drop it down, you control it completely from AWS. You don't have to fiddle with it at all. You just plug it in and it'll do the thing that it needs to do. And then once you get it to AWS, you can do anything you want with it once you get it to AWS. The other thing to think about is that, okay, it's 50 megabits up. Who else is using that internet? And so the other thing you're going to want to do is make sure that there is some kind of router or something that you can build a VLAN for. For a streaming music event at 1080p, what you want to try to do is see if you can organize carving off at least 15 megs of that 50 megs into its own VLAN that you can let everybody else do whatever they want with everything else. At 30p, 1080p, a good solid bandwidth to look at is 6 to 8 megs a second, 8 on the kind of the high end, and 6 on a minimally, a solid end, 4 on the, and that's it for H.264. Because the Elemental Link is using HEVC, you could get away with potentially a little bit less. So those are things to think about there. But that's our rule of thumb for H.264 is 8 megs a second is what you're trying to get, and then what you do is you double that, and that's what you try to get your VLAN set to, just to make sure that you have plenty of headroom.
And Guy.
Yeah, I knew my brain would kick in with that other service. It's caster.io is the one that'll take SRT and flip it around up in the cloud to H.264, so you could send it right into YouTube. The other thing to think about is renting or purchasing a live view with the LRT bonding service. You actually can see which modem's doing what. So you can plug in the venue's Ethernet, and that works fine. It'll automatically segment over to there and say, hey, just utilize this really strong connection. But in case something does dip, like all of a sudden somebody gives out the password to the Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden Alex's event that had all these people soaking up the bandwidth that was existing, and then you're like, what do I do? But with a live view type scenario, it would just flex over and go, hey, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, bloop, 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 bloop. And it'll either take them all three together and send up, it'll segment the video and send up the packets individually, but then rebond them back in the cloud. And that's what you pay for. So when you buy a live view, don't forget that it's another $350 a year for the LRT bonding service. It's not free to bond. So be aware. And then there's PepWave and PepLink with SpeedFusion as another option to take a look at.
I've heard a lot of people have success with PepWave as well. And thank you for that reminder, Guy, about your paying for the bonding. Just to pull in the chat here, Richard Bowman says that they use Resi for our weekly live streams, and he hasn't seen any major issues that he can recall on. So it's worked really well for them so far. So Scott, that might be a good source to see how Richard and their community have been able to use it. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas again. Alex, what's the label creation date on your Insta360 Link? Is this the most exciting unboxing you will ever do? And he actually is doing a little bragging here. He's got a Zhongshan China label creation date listed here down to the minute.
Go ahead, Alex.
I don't know if a webcam is. It looks like it might be a great webcam, but I don't know if it would be the most exciting unboxing I've ever done. My creation date was the 3rd of August, and the delivery is supposed to be on Wednesday. So we'll see what this looks like. I am cautiously positive that this, if it works well, if it looks as good as what Justine showed on her review, I think that this could end up being something that we start putting into our kits, because it just gives us a lot more control than what we had before with the Brio, and potentially the chip is considerably better. I do applaud the idea that we're now finally starting to see webcam. The problem really with industrial design is you have all this hardware. To do something well takes a long time. There's all the modeling, there's the figuring out the circuitry, there's figuring out all those things, there's the tooling of the factories, there's so these things take years oftentimes to develop these hardware products that are at a really high level if you're not just going to try to take some other body and make it work. So this is probably a reaction to COVID, but then they probably started talking about it 2 years ago, and now we're seeing it roll out. That's kind of the nature of these things. And so I think that what's exciting for a lot of us is that it'll most likely, this is the beginning of of some more competition, especially as work from home continues. I think we're going to see a lot more folks to make that work.
And what was it that caused you to get this? Because I might have missed that if it was on a.
Well, I get almost every. I get almost every camera out there to make that work. And so anytime I see something that potentially could be part of our kits, I get it. And so this is a pan tilt zoom 1/2 inch chip with what apparently is a lot of control. So we're kind of trying to figure those things out. And so I think that it has some real potential to being a really interesting solution in a camera, that it could look a lot better. We could have a lot more control. It looks like its native field of view is 67 degrees. I think we talked about that over the weekend at one of our get-togethers, which is very positive. It means that we're using more resolution for less field of view, rather than these 80 and 90, kind of these insane field of views that we've been seeing with a lot of these cameras. They're like, oh, well, you can zoom in. Well, I don't want to zoom in. I just wanted to start there, And so I think that this, it looks really, really good, and they can do that. One of the reasons they can do the 67 degree field of view, and I would have made it 60, or even high 50s. But the reason they can go down is because they have a pan tilt zoom camera. They can actually move it around. Everybody else is trying to pan inside the frame. And what they're doing is saying, well, I'll just move the camera, and so they have, what in the unboxing is a tiny little camera, but it's got pan tilt zoom. It looks exactly like the DJI Osmo, the little head. In fact, some of us suspect that they licensed it from DJI. And so it looks just like the DJI head, except that it's on a webcam. So I think that it's going to be, it's a really interesting model, for that. I think that because I think that really, if you took out the battery and the storage and all the processing required for that, you'd end up with something about that size from the DJI head. And so I think that's interesting. I think there's this very odd future where if you're using something like OBS, you could have 3 of these cameras, especially if you can figure out a way to control them all, and do a 3-camera shoot in something that you could fit into your backpack. So it's a really, and I'm also looking at it as things like an overhead camera or a kind of a close-up camera for teaching and so on and so forth. So it'll be really interesting to see what it does. It has a lot of potential. I'm still not going to say it's the most exciting unboxing I will ever do. Ever is a really big word unless we're talking about, except when we're talking about using DI boxes.
Yeah, as soon as you said that you compared it to like the DJI, their cameras, I instantly thought of like, yeah, great overhead shot, whether you're doing cooking or teaching or any of those elements. So yeah, looking forward to.
If you think about it as a teacher, you could theoretically have 2 or 3 of these things with Keynote, have all of them identified to Keynote as 3 different cameras, be cutting in between these things. It could really be pretty exciting if it works.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I think I looked at their demo. It actually has a mode where it auto-recognizes a whiteboard and will frame up the whiteboard.
You put there's stickers that they send with it that Justine, when she opened it up, she's like, I don't know why they sent me so many stickers. Then later she was like, oh, I see. So anyways, you put them on the corners and it maps to those stickers so that it knows where the whiteboard is, and then it will rectify the whiteboard. So if it sees it at an angle, it'll
reduce the parallax. Yeah. Keystone correct.
Keystone correct. Yeah.
Next question.
Next one comes from Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. And Craig says, is Zoom's Zoom chat feature a strategy to get into the Teams and or Slack space?
Go ahead, Alex.
They've been working on this for a long time. I have never seen a company push something so hard and for something that I just don't want. So I just get, it comes out as like, do you know about chat and how is it looking? Have you thought about using chat? I'm sure it's trying to fit into a bigger picture because, that part of Teams and part of Slack is the larger ecosystem and getting people to use it. And I don't know what it's like for every user, but for me, I'm like, close the window. like I'm not, this isn't what I came here for. Maybe, I don't know if they're making any inroads with anyone, but man, does it seem like they are really trying to push this, and I have not. I love Zoom.
I was going to ask, I was like, has anybody used it?
Yeah, I think everybody I know just goes click. Okay, fine.
Likewise. Yes. Guy?
Yeah, we went ahead and bit on the hook that was presented before us multiple times, which was, hey, come over to our Zoom phone service and we'll pay off your 3-year commitment that you had with Comcast. Okay, so I bit. It wound up costing me tens of thousands of dollars, but I switched over all the folks, got rid of all the old phones, and now it's one integrated solution. So it does actually work really well for us. So we're using Zoom chat heavily. We got rid of Skype. There were some despondent people who had different things going on in different worlds, but now we're all on Zoom chat. And so we're using it heavily. We only have 17 people in our org, but we use the heck out of it. I mean, it's going off right now. Well, I stay out of certain things, like I don't really want the shipping updates and things like that. So there's a bunch of stuff that I'm not.
And you've essentially replaced Slack with it? We
weren't using Slack, but
you're using it in a Slack, in the main.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll have files in there. We call them gold stars. So like if somebody does something awesome on the team, we'll do gold stars in there. But just a lot of shipping updates, a lot of like, hey, where's this ATEM broadcast panel or one of those things? Like, can we get it for this customer fast? So it's in our organization, it's replaced a number of other tools. Like I was using Slack, but just among management. And so the rest of the team was just on Skype. And so it just depends on what your needs are. And if you want a solution that's all in one, because then it's just one app on your phone that keeps everything together, and you know where to reach for everything instead of having to go to 3 different apps. And so with Zoom communications, as far as the webinar, the meetings, the phone, and now chat, for us in our organization, we're a small business. I mean, we're not 1,000 people, but for us, it's been working great, especially with the phone being able to escalate a phone call into a meeting if we want to, which is unique. You can do that really easily. So everybody on the team's been really happy with Zoom phone and Zoom chat.
So are you saying that from a call that say with a customer, you can bring it into a Zoom meeting seamlessly. Is that what you're trying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll sometimes have, like, I'll be talking like in a meeting like this, and I can just dial up a phone call and bring it in, or I can be on a phone call and bring it into a Zoom meeting. Yeah, either way, it's pretty handy when you want to get a couple people, because like in the bottom of mine, well, and yours too, it says invite, but because our org's so heavy into it, everybody's in there, including the Zoom room. So I can be here at home, and I could fire off auto answer at a conference room, and it'll light up the conference room and bring them into the meeting. So it's powerful when you get it really dialed in.
I can see that being very beneficial.
And you can dial out with it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you just dial out. You can just call people and bring them in without them having to be part of a schedule at all. You just.
Yep.
John Snyder says
I may stop ignoring it.
Right.
Now,
Guy, that was a good.
Now the guy likes it. I'm like, okay, fine.
Totally vetted there. John Snyder makes a really good point here in the comments. He says Zoom is trying to find its identity beyond video conferencing. For example, expanding into corporate communications with chat and building out the call center functionality. Alex, you wanted to add?
That was it. That I'm now not going to just close the window and go, wow, they're really over pushing this. I'm now going to take a look at it. We'll see what we see.
All right. So more updates coming. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Tlaloc, Miguel Lopez Waterman, and he's in a plane. That's interesting. Can we do a deep dive on timecode and sync one day? Let's get into genlock and timecode and other sync workflow tools.
Courtney.
Sure, I'm willing to dive in. I've had a lot of timecode experience, so I can help contribute to the pool and the depth of the pool. So anytime you want to do that, let me know. And
Mitchell.
Yeah, I'd like to see us do best practices from shooting right on through post-production, right from the Danicky slate or the Deity version, how to jam cameras together, get synchronous time code, not just time code, all those things. Best practices is the thing I'd like to see.
We need someone to put that in the second hours. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, definitely put it in the second hours. Also, if you feel like you have some expertise in time code, reach out to either me or Josh Kaufman. Let us know that they're there, and we'll try to schedule it around everybody so that we know that we have some experts in addition to Courtney and potentially Nikki and other folks. It'd be great for us to kind of, and we'll think about all the different things we cover, give people a warning. We're trying to get a little bit more prepped on these second hours. I think it's a great suggestion. I think it'll be a great second hour, and we just want to make sure we collect a group of people that kind of look at it from all these different directions.
And Bill.
Yeah, because I lived in timecode world for most of my career because every facility lived and died by it, particularly all the editors. And there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that you probably don't understand if you've just seen it as a something on paper, what user bits and things like that, camera locations. It's a big, deep synthy standard, the way that it runs in America, and worth diving into, I think. It'd be a good show.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Is it a good idea to attempt to turn off Wi-Fi on consumer electronics and production devices that have LAN connections? If so, then how? If the Wi-Fi enabled devices are not connected to a network, do they still interfere with 2.4 gigahertz channels?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, 1,000 times yes. Please, by all means, turn off Wi-Fi. The less your production boxes have to do in any environment, the better. Easiest way to do it is in Windows. Go into Device Manager and disable your wireless LAN driver. In Mac OS, go into the Networks panel and then just disable Wi-Fi. That's the way to do it permanently. And I'm also going to say that Windows 10 has this wonderful little communicate with unpaired devices that can do all sorts of things that you really don't want done in a production or any other environment. So just turn it off. There are links in Mukana.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I've got a new TV, and it wants to talk on Wi-Fi and Ethernet, and it's very verbose. With the Wi-Fi connection, it's flashing, internet connection, Wi-Fi lost or on. It seems to be very picky. The only time I'd have it on is just to get the latest software update, and then it's out of here.
And Alex?
Yeah, this is what happens. It's the handshake that actually starts to create what Wi-Fi drops, especially if you're trying to stream something in real time, especially WebRTC in a low latency video environment. You will see drops, and it doesn't have to do with how much bandwidth you have. It has to do with the APs getting hit by things that are trying to do a handshake and trying to say hi and talk about things and see how the weather is. And so you definitely want to turn things off. Turning that Wi-Fi off should make a difference. And as Mitchell outlined, you should never allow your TV to talk to the internet. The reason that your TVs are I wouldn't say ever, but I would say never, ever, never, ever. Yeah, no, it's the reason that your TVs are priced the way that they are is because they're selling your data. That's how they save money. So you can buy the TV and thwart that by not allowing it to touch an Ethernet cable when potentially Wi-Fi.
Good point there. Next question.
Next question comes from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. The holidays are coming. What's your favorite all-time ad or campaign and why?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I spend most of my life trying to find a way to avoid adverts as a sort of life goal. But the best ones always come to you as connections rather than actually seeing them themselves. So there's a company in the UK called John Lewis or John Lewis Partnership. If you have never seen Monty the Penguin, I suggest you Google Monty the Penguin now. I will put a link in, and I think that they run some of the best campaigns.
And this was kind of inspired from Alex and I going back and forth on Twitter about content and then having ideas for campaigns. And I was thinking, who's done a really great job? And I think that Dove and Old Spice are some of those memorable ones with the emotion, like Dove having their campaign about unmasking and the real beauty, inner beauty in women. So that being a really memorable one, because not only did they have the video aspect of it, but they also, and I think this was like in the beginning of where you started to see companies now giving you more. So now we were getting the outtakes, and then we were getting behind the scenes, and then we were getting additional stories. So it really having longer, more legs and tentacles. So that was one of the reasons I like that campaign. And similarly with the Old Spice one, I think that was probably one of the first times we really saw those transitions between scenes that were not jump cuts or anything like that, but just moving sets, and what that did for social media, and then them building out. And again, this is more the early days of like Twitter and Facebook, and just seeing how it went from like television, but then really taking off online. So those were my picks. Mitchell?
Yeah, when I was a kid, it wasn't Christmas until the Santa Claus riding the Noroko triple header down to his little chalet was, that signaled Christmas to me. So either that or hearing Burl Ives sing Holly Jolly Christmas.
Alex?
I think a lot of the Apple campaigns are pretty good. The I'm a Mac, was devastating. It was like when you look at the actual effect that it had, it was a devastating campaign. But then the other ones that they get into with I remember the kind of the outlier teenager shooting video with his iPad and then cutting it together for the family for Christmas was really a good, just well designed, and then the most recent one is the one that they had with the woman, the woman who's trying to write, and she doesn't believe in what she's writing, and she's pushing it out, and it flies out over the, out into the square, and then people are reading it, and they push pretty hard, like they get pretty good at storytelling there. So I think that most of the Apple campaigns have been pretty effective.
Go ahead, John.
Wasabi. My favorite campaign, because people still say it today.
Good point. Bill?
+1 on John Lewis, because they are some of the most well-produced. They take a year to design and put those on the air, and they're beautiful at doing that emotional connection to the audience around the holidays. The other thing, I know this may seem weird, but I actually pay a lot of attention to what the big insurance companies, particularly like Flow and Progressive and those kind of things, only because they spend massive amounts of money on them. And it's been interesting watching the sitcomification of advertising, where you understand the characters and you understand what the role of Flo is, what the role of Jamie, the second banana, is. You understand when you see those characters, they write to what the audience has understood about them after 10 or 15 years in the business of doing these consistently. And also they're willing to go away from it. You will see standalone ads as they testing against the primary campaign. We never saw that back in the old days, but they just have such monster budgets these days that the idea of let's continue to evolve and try to do outside things even outside of the primary campaign that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on. That was all big changes that I had never seen in advertising before. What we saw before was once you figure out your character, you stick with them for 100 years. And that's kind of changing.
And Courtney.
Yeah, I miss humor in advertising. I think it's gone the way of political correctness, and now advertisers are so afraid to use any kind of humor because any kind of humor probably has to be at someone's expense. And so they're afraid to alienate any individual group or person or other than self-deprecating humor. And if you have an insurance company making fun of itself, okay, the progressive spots have done that and have been successful with it. But other than making fun of your own product, which advertisers or clients tend not to approve those kind of spots, you don't see very many humorous ads except maybe during the Super Bowl. I miss the Geno's pizza rolls and the Stan Freberg. Since Stan Freberg died, the humor in advertising has taken a definite dip.
And JJ McKenna adds that he likes the Thai Health Council, and Roscoe Jones says the Volkswagen Darth Vader kid. That was definitely a memorable one. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is up next. Apple recently retired the last iPod models. I was surprised that the latest iPod Touch was only released in 2019. Are there any advantages to acquiring an iDevice such as this without cellular for production usage?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, yes, because it runs all iOS. If you can at least run almost the latest iOS, they will probably not support upgrades to the latest version of iOS on the iPods after a certain point in time. But, you know, they're great for, they connect to Wi-Fi, so even if it needs to be connected to the internet for internet browsing, things like that, watching media, you can use them for that. You can give it to your kids to entertain them because it plays all those great games that are available for iOS. So, yeah, it's a wonderful iOS platform that is pretty cheap, and you don't have the fear of them, butt dialing the president or something,
And Guy.
Yeah, we were kind of surprised at this too because we buy them and put them inside of our one-button studio as the controller. So this is a custom keyboard, and then we use Mimo Live. So in Mimo Live, you can actually take an iOS device and make your own buttons, which is really cool. So those were only like $200. So we could have, fire off this graphic, switch to this input on the ATEM. But then they took it away from us. So we have to now buy the more expensive iPhone SE, which is like $400. So it's double the price. And we're not really taking advantage of that processor speed. If it were me to use it in production, I would just bite the bullet and just go with the iPad Mini because it's more powerful. And if you're doing stuff like, mix effect or something to control your Behringer X-Touch or sound devices, Wingman, those are apps that you could benefit from the bigger screen anyway. So I would probably just jump up to the ATEM Mini for production stuff. I have the iPad Pro, the big one, and I love it. I love the big screen on that sucker. I carry that thing with me everywhere and find that I get a lot of use out of it.
Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. What are the benefits of purchasing the Raspberry Pi version of the Playout B versus the Mac or PC version? When is the extra hardware worth it?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I like the idea of having a bespoke playback device that's specifically built to do just what it's doing, as opposed to dumbing down an M1 Mac or some other piece of software or hardware like a PC. You just have to optimize it. So with the Raspberry Pi, you got all the opportunities in the world to do that.
And Courtney.
Yeah, you can stick it in a rack and not have to look at it, have it boot headless if you want, and have it just react and connect to your ATEM Mini and autoplay when you select it and so on. So it has a lot of those advantages to it.
Next question.
Larry Engelhardt in Chicago is up next. At events, we provide room audio, IMAG, and video conferencing, and we ran a podium mic to the audio mixer and split the audio output between the video cam and speakers. At one point, I disconnected the audio feed to the camera and got a horrible squeal from the speakers. Why?
Jason?
Without knowing exactly what was going on, I can venture a guess. This is either has to do with an aux send on your mixer that wasn't quite right, or more simply, if you disconnect the external input, it probably is going to go to the area mic on the camera. And the area mic on the camera somehow is finding its way back to the speakers, and then you've got some nice feedback.
Alex?
Yeah, I think exactly what Jason said. I think that what happened was it changed the state of the camera. it went and grabbed it, and you're getting that audio back from the camera into your mixer, or that you probably had that somewhere throughout that process. What I will say is that we generally frown upon plugging or unplugging anything during an event unless it's absolutely necessary. So unless something is on fire and we have to fix it, we get into a set state, and we don't want anyone unplugging anything while people are on stage. And that's something that we kind of beat out of people, that are in our teams. Like people, I'm just going to leave now. I'm going to unplug something. We won't unplug the power on a laptop, while we're running it. Once we get into a show state, everything stays exactly the way it is if we know it was working.
And Mickey says in the chat that every passive split has a 3 dB of loss. When you unplug the camera, the loudspeakers went louder and caused feedback. And I just want to go back to what Alex said about not touching anything during a production, because last year when we did the remote for Matt in the kitchen, and the audience might have, there was a moment where the host, she could no longer hear what was going through, and that was because we were trying to put a Bluetooth in her ear so that she could hear better. And then we were all on the back end. Mickey did a great job of talking me through to try to help get her back in, but we changed the state of what we did. Let me take full responsibility. I changed it thinking that would be better. So that was like a lesson right there. Do not change anything during the production.
And it forces you to think a little bit from a logistics perspective. If you think that it's an option that you could fix something at the last minute, then some things have a tendency to find their way to the last minute. Whereas if you just go, I can't change anything an hour before the event. Usually for us, an hour before the event, we don't want anything to move. Like we don't want anybody to move anything, change anything. There are occasions when we have to do a quick setup or a quick change, and that's part of and if we do that, I had an event recently where we had to reset some things in 10 minutes. We rehearsed it and timed it and figured it out exactly where these things are going to go, and then when they come back and how long it was going to take. And then we doubled the amount of time that we told the client we could do it in. And we figured out what the testing procedure is going to be. So anytime we have to make those changes, they're part of a process, but we always want to look at that. We want to be flat and happy with what we had a full hour before. And that requires you to ask for clients for a lot more time. Like I was explaining to a client recently about a load in, and I said, well, I need 4 hours to set up. I need three hours to rehearse. And then I need 2 hours of space. People are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, because life isn't perfect, and I need 2 hours that are there for me to kind of work through things if I want to. And there have been a lot of times when that 2 hours was fully used, and it produces a much better event and much more worth whatever someone was paying for it. Great point. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama has our last one before the break. Courtney, do these MeLE PCs handle vMix and or Zoom? I wish I didn't have to limit them to ATEM Control and Streamdeck.
Courtney.
They can handle Zoom up to 720p. Zoom has this artificial limit of not letting you go to 1080p on a webinar unless you have more than 4 cores or 4 threads. And these are quad-core machines. vMix, no, I probably wouldn't recommend it for vMix. It doesn't have enough horsepower to handle that. vMix really works a lot better if you have a discrete graphics processor. And all of these chip PCs are onboard chip graphics that share memory with the CPU. So probably not for that. But it can handle most other. I use it for playback, and like I say, I've played back 3 screens full of HD material simultaneously without stuttering. I have run into some audio stutter problems, and I think it's Windows 11 drivers haven't been updated yet for this particular processor, which is a 5105 processor, I think. And I think they'll eventually get that ironed out with an updated graphics or audio drivers for Windows 11. But there have been some problems with Windows 11 and these newer processors because the drivers haven't come up to date yet.
Guy, real quick.
Yeah, some of the beelinks do have the discrete graphics cards in them. The ones that start to approach the $600-700 mark are pretty powerful. The one thing that's crazy about some of these meles and beelinks is that they come with Windows Pro. So with Pro, you get remote desktop, which is crazy. So you can run that thing headless and you could just tap right into it. So I think a lot of people don't know that that's one of the benefits of Windows Pro. So think about that. We use the beelinks as AWS machines to reach out and control other machines via remote desktop or Parsec or even TeamViewer, and that's it.
All right, thank you.
I might
all.
point out the license for Windows 11 Pro is more than the cost of a beelink, just for the license for Windows.
Thank you, Courtney. Well, that was a great first hour. Producers, thank you so much for your questions. Now we're going to shift into our discussion around budgeting and some best practices, because a budget at the end of the day is your financial plan for how you're going to run your project, your shoot, your campaign. And you can never put too much detail inside of a budget. And I'm going to just show you two quick samples, and then we can dive into just how others, because we were saying this, I was saying earlier in the show, of just how whether you are a marketing director or you're leading a team, or pretty much everyone on the panel in some point in time has had to create a budget where that is making sure that the project stays on task. You do not run, most importantly, you do not run out of money, because the worst thing that could happen would be that you need extra days or extra time and you don't have the money to actually do that. So I've pulled this sample. This sample budget was actually from Poem My Focus, and they have it just basic, and it's a pretty simple budget as they've shaped it out into. They've got sections for pre-production, production, and then post-production. And that's one of, if we want to talk about areas where people might slip up, is, okay, you've got the production, but if the client's asking you to actually do the post-production elements, that, you make sure that you have that in your budget, as well as how long is it going to take. We talk a lot about scope creep, and this is where you can also make sure you mitigate that by ensuring that you have, and I'll actually go over to this budget here, where you have, you make contingency, and contingency on average is 5 or 10% of whatever your actual budget is. And just to explain this sheet here. So typically, if I am on a call with someone, or even after we get off the call, I can quickly plug in the numbers of whatever in this case, and this is just an example one. So, how many days do we need to be on site? Who needs to be there? Plugging that in first internally. So what is that cost to us? And then now here is the rate for the client, and making whatever adjustments, because typically when you go back, if they have not given you, well, this is the budget, because I don't know how many of you, I would love to hear from the panel, when you are speaking and they're like, I'm not sure what something like this would cost, you let me know. So I don't have it set up here, but another column would be different scenarios. So if their budget was, $100K, and what that could look like, and just being prepared to share different options with them is key. And like I said, just the contingency fee there. Yeah, I've got, so that's essentially in this one. And before I stop sharing my screen, that when we are going through the numbers, and as a producer, I will also make sure that I have spoken to everyone that is involved in the project, because I want to make sure that there are things that maybe I might not have considered when it comes to to the project in question. So I make sure that the director, that I've spoken to them and I explain the project. We speak for some period of time to make sure, because there's things that they are going to hear differently than I hear from the client on the project. So wait, we've got to make sure we have this. We've got to make sure that we have that. And then those are different areas that, while this was just the budget from a talent perspective, there are the other elements of, do you need to rent anything? Do you need to make additional purchases? There's a project I was working on over the weekend, and when we met for our final pre-production last week, it was, okay, what about the drives? And do we need someone else, a production assistant, to be on site to make sure that they're dumping the footage that's coming in from everyone? Because we want to make sure that we're not using extra time to actually have, to wait on some of the photographers and the shooters to actually send us their footage afterwards. So there are just so many things that, when you are putting the budget together, having those conversations will reduce any issues that might happen later on. So again, making sure that you have a clear understanding of what the project is, the project scope, and then making sure you talk to all the key stakeholders that are involved in the project, and then that contingency fee, because as Alex had answered that previous question where he budgeted more time for the changes that they had to make, and they actually used up that time, that's where that contingency of, as they say in the production event world, if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. So that our job is to make sure that we're thinking 10 steps ahead, so that if and when that happens, that we are prepared for that. Alex?
Yeah, and a lot of times it is, there are a lot of larger corporate clients that'll take your contingency away. So you have to, they'll just go, well, we're not going to put a contingency in, because they're just assuming that you're going to spend into it, and they just think that you're just adding 10% more to the budget, and so you do have a challenge there. And so a lot of times we are pretty conservative about how many hours it's going to take everybody to do things. So we assume that we will have some overtime. We assume that we are going to take, this is going to take a little bit longer. There's a temptation oftentimes to do what we call getting the project pregnant, which is just like you get it over the hill, but it can't actually be done at that rate. So you have to, and so you get it over that hill, and then you underwrite it. That is a very stressful way to build your client relationship. And it's what a lot of companies will do is they'll underbid something on the way in, and then they'll just add all this stuff up, and then by the end there's all these ads that the client wasn't really clear of, and suddenly it's 20% more. For a small company, it's stressful. For a large corporation, they won't want to work with you again. Like them having your contact having to go back and ask for more money, even a couple $1,000, may be something that's very stressful for them, because they've gotten approval for that. So you want to try to avoid that. And I will go in conservative and just say, well, this is what it takes to get this done. And then if they want to cut back, we can start, cutting closer to the bone, related to that. But I usually will use up all the resources that I'm given to make it as good. I'm always worried about how do we make sure that the product that we're producing is the highest quality? I'm looking at the other people that are in the room, the other hosts that are there, the other thing, like how do we make sure that this is a great event? Not necessarily how do we do it for the cheapest amount of money, and that's a very hard conversation to get into until you start building a track record. Sometimes you just get in to do what you're going to do, but you have to be ready to take a hit, with what you're doing. When given the opportunity, there are a lot of companies we work with that want line item budgets. When given the opportunity, I'll get rid of line item budgets pretty quickly, not because I'm trying to make more money, but because I want more flexibility. I want to be able to, if I save money on hotel rooms, I want to be able to spend them on lenses, and I don't want it to have some line item that comes in and means that I can't, because I don't have a shelf for that anymore. Right. In Hollywood, that's very, very hard. In large corporations, I still list in very tight detail what I'm going to provide. But I just have a number, and then this costs a certain number. Again, it does make people a little crazy, but a lot of times you can do a better project for less when you're not caught up in these little folders that you have to put budgets into. And so those are the things that you kind of want to kind of think through. The best way to do that is to build a product. And what I mean by that is, instead of line iteming everything, you may have, this is our standard camera shoot. Like this is a camera shoot that is 3 cameras, we charge this much money for it. Like we're not, like we do the same thing over and over again. It's basically a rate sheet that is just like, if you want this service, a 2-camera shoot, a 3-camera shoot, whatever, there's just one number, because it's no longer we're going to figure it all out. We've done this often enough. Like we had a product that we provided to a client, and we probably did, hundreds of them. But it was $6,000. It was a virtual event. It was a virtual event. It's a discussion with up to 10 people as a Hangouts. And this is what you get with it. And, it's $6,000. And once they had that, we found that we did find that for little events, for corporations, large corporations, $6,000 was the number, right? Anything below that is kind of like, yeah, sure. Anything above that was like, oh, I need a line item bid for this. And so we figured out how to do it for that and how to make it work for us. And then we just made it a line. This is the product that you're buying. And that's, when people ask for that line item, a lot of times the response would be, well, when you go into a restaurant, do you ask how much they're paying for wheat today, and how much they're paying the cook, and how much is the electricity? No, you don't ask, how much are the tomatoes today? You're not asking for any of that stuff. You just ask, what's the cost of the spaghetti? And I said, and today the spaghetti is $6,000, and it's really good. And so you can get into that if it is a known product. And again, you also, a lot of times I take it in, I'm going to win. I approach this as I'm going to win some and I'm going to lose some. I don't sit there and try to manage my margin for everything. There are some events that I will just eat it. We were in an event in Chicago with a former president, and when we looked at our lens in the back of the room, I was like the 85 to 300 Cabrillo. I was like, too short. Like I can't get the shot that I want of these, and everybody was VIPs that were on the stage. So I hired somebody in Portland to go find a 50 to 1,000 Canon lens. That's where we found it, in Portland. They ran over, got it, rented it. We rented it from them. The person got it, jumped on a plane, flew it to Chicago, and in the same day we put the lens in, and it was perfect. And did we talk to the client about a change order? No, we did not. Because that was, it just was a better looking show, and that's the kind of stuff that if you quietly put those fires out, because they would have said no, and the show would have been a much lower quality, and it still reflects on us. And so the thing is, what reflects on us is that our shows look better than everybody else's, and we push harder. Now we do the best we can to get that into the budget, to make sure that it's there. But you also have to be tenacious about that. You're going to get the best product out, and within reason, you're going to do other extras if you need to, because that yields end over end. Now, the last thing I'll say is that we never give away our equipment. When we're budgeting, if I own the equipment, I rent it at market rate. When I put it in the thing, I put it, because that's a huge buffer for us. Is if we want to eat into it, if we need to buy something extra, we want to do something extra. We don't give. What's interesting is that most clients understand that equipment costs something to rent. They don't expect. Some people who ask you to give your equipment for free are bad clients. They're bad clients. Get rid of those people. They're not. As soon as they say that, that they're a bad client. And so because equipment costs something. It costs something to keep up. It costs something to store. It costs something. That's a service you're providing. So we'll charge market rate. Oftentimes we'll charge a little less than market rate. That's their advantage to the fact that we own it. But it helps you constantly upgrade your equipment too. I mean, that's how I built a warehouse of 10,000 square feet at one time, was just, charging for my equipment, but it also means that you have a buffer when other things don't go well. There is a revenue coming in that if you don't buy anything new and you don't fix anything, there's revenue based on the hardware that you already had. And really what made that possible for us was black magic, to be honest. Like we couldn't do that when it was Everett's and Grass Valley and everything else. You had to rent everything. And what really changed the business model was being able to buy it at a rate that made sense.
How long did it, that point where you said that having a product that you can provide them, is there a certain type of client? Because I know that there are some folks that are freelancers and some that are growing or trying to scale their business. When you say having a good product and being able to not necessarily provide line items, because it does depend. Government folks, they kind of want line items or want to see what they're getting.
The government folks over $2,000. So under $2,000, government they can put it on their credit card. Right. So that's the number in the federal government anyway. So as soon as you can make a PDF, create something that it's just a matter of you organizing it and saying what it is. Because what you can say is if you fit into this thing, usually a line item will come out higher than that rate. So if they really want to itemize it, you give them the itemized, and it's like 10% more or 20% more, because that's what a line item will do. You can package things in so that these are set rates. We have the equipment for this. We have the people for this. We know how to do it. It takes less. It oftentimes will take less prep work and so on and so forth. And because of all of that, this is the number we're gonna. This is what we're gonna do it for. Do it for you at this number. So that tends to be something that we try to get to. And before 090 does a lot more. We work with a lot more clients, and the plan is the way the business model works is much more line item. But in Pixel Core, out of over 2,000 events, I mean, we did 10 line items bids ever, and the largest one that we did without a line item was I think $1.4 million. It was just like big long pages of what we're going to do and what we're going to provide, and all the cameras and everything else. Not that we weren't being detailed, and we had a very detailed model of what that looked like. We knew exactly how much we thought it would cost, but the number at the bottom was just the number, and the client didn't like it, I will admit, and the client went out and bid it, and every bid that came in was 30 to 50% more than what we were doing. And so then at that point they were like, well, and we had a history of doing really good work. And so if you can get it to a point where it's cost effective, you have to figure out what that line item, that the non-line item has to be cost effective. It can't be some big number, it has to be. And the reason you've done that is because you figured out how to be efficient. You figured out we figured out how to, one of the things we learned really quickly is if we've got a union crew of 35 people, that we will hire someone on our team that works with the steward or the multiple stewards in this case, and tightly, like razor sharp, tightly manage the hours. Like we have a person who sits there and they're not thinking about anything other than call times, and meal breaks and everything else. And we saved, like in a budget like that, we probably saved $150,000. To just manage. Now, of course, I don't know if the union guys liked it as much, because that was $150,000 didn't go to the union. But we got it. We became really, really tight about exactly how that all worked and exactly what all the rules were. And that person's constantly talking to the stewards about, okay, what's this? And they're reading all the rules and making it all work. We also did things like, we figured things out, and when you have it all in that kind of fuzz, especially if you've done the event over and over again, you figure out, I can set all of these things up together, or I can package these things together and save that money. In a line item, it's very hard to do that, because the fuzzy math gets really, like, it's hard for you to rectify later, when you're trying to figure it out. And so it's easier if you get a big package. You can usually save people money. You need to save people money with a non-line item bid, not charge them more. That's the main thing that has to happen there. But otherwise, I would say, just with the line item, before we get into the questions, is that or other people, is to your point, make sure that you talk to everyone about how much they're going to charge. And what it costs, and what are the what's going to work for them, and whether they're going to be available, and all the other things. Like, the one thing I see people do the most is they don't build the job. So if I'm going to give someone a line item, I'm going to build the entire job, the timelines, the process, the flights, I'm going to figure every little bit out of that. But my budgets take a long time to produce. I can't just throw you a budget because I'm not guessing. I am like figuring out, okay, they're going to load in at 5 a.m. and we are going to be done with this at this time. And then we're going to take a meal break right here. And then we're going to do this. And this is all the cameras and this is all the record devices. And this is the graphics we're going to use. And, and I really think through the budget is the project, and I will figure out the entire project of exactly what it needs to be. And it takes a long time to budget for me because I want to know exactly. And I will admit that I try to hang on to the budget as long as I can because the client keeps changing things. So I have a budget. And so I just keep on like holding on to the budget and I will give them a number. Like I go, okay, I know that, I know this number is not going to go over 90,000. Like I'll say it's not going to go over 90 grand, but I don't know. It'll be somewhere below that. And if they start getting close to that 90 grand, I go, you're getting close to 90 grand. like you're now asking for things. But usually I'll hang on to that budget until I feel like it's settled. And then I hand them. But usually we have a numbers doc that we have open. We have the pre-production, and then we have our labor in one section, and then we have our equipment in another section, and then as you said, post, and then things to remember is like, are you feeding people? Like it's funny, it slides through. So how much are you going to charge for every for every person? Is that meal something that are you doing DoorDash? Are you doing catering? Are you like, for instance, are you allowed to do bring food in? So if you work at Moscone, you have to spend an enormous amount of money on food that you should never eat. And so a lot of times that's another thing. And then so those are the things you have to kind of think about as well. And like also little things like, how much does it cost for them to get to the airport? Someone's going to send you a receipt for getting from the airport to your event. so you put those numbers in too. So you really have to think about every person, almost their entire process, and what are they going to send you a receipt for, and making sure that those things are represented. And then even though I don't do contingency, oftentimes somewhere in there's a miscellaneous of like a couple $1,000s. It's just like, I don't know. And I don't call it a contingency, but I do call it miscellaneous. And we almost always use it up. And we use it up again. It's like, oh, we need that one more thing that'll make it better, or oh, this will, but we always, it's not something we keep. It just means that we have a little bit of movement on that. And if we can, the best thing to do is to come in to bid high and then come in under the budget is something you're always trying to do, is come in a couple $1,000s below the budget even. It just means that you're trying to give back and only charge what you used.
Right. It's part of the relationship building process. Go ahead, Bill.
I didn't do quite that extreme, but I did over the course of years. I moved away from using Excel for my things, and I developed this one-page sheet. I think I've shown it here before, but I called it my video production estimate, and its design was to make sure that I didn't lose money. It had the traditional above the line, below the line, and then post-production. Let me get a cursor over here, and then a number at the bottom that they could look to quickly. And it was very much the same process that the normal Excel spreadsheets does. How many days? What is the unit cost? What does it extend out to? I have a limited set of things. My goal was to keep this on a single page because I didn't want to spend a ton of time, even with the bean counters. And I say that lovingly because they're important, because you have to understand that a lot of people's job is to make sure that costs stay controlled. So when you get into something like that, I wanted us to have a document that we could talk about were there to be pushback on a number at the bottom. But it's not the real thing that I gave the client at the end of things. This was mostly so I could make sure I wasn't missing anything. All they got was a quotation, and the quotation had vague, general, we're going to have this many cameras and this many people for this many days. And there was a number at the bottom. And that is what got sent out. And it was only if I got somebody from accounting who wanted to go through the numbers that I would come back to this. And there's two things I'll point out on it. The very first thing on the top line was my production fee. To me, that was the money you're paying me to make your video and to do all this planning. I never, in all the years I was doing this, I never had a client, not one single one, asked me to cut my production fee. So whatever number I put on the top, I kind of got to the feeling that they were saying you're not worth that, and they just wouldn't do that. So that stayed sacrosanct. The other thing is that I did put exactly what Alex is talking about, contingency fees in the bottom here. But for me, this was my brown M&Ms. this was a part of the writer. If they got down to looking at that, that meant some accountant had detailed things, and it indicates exactly what the contingency fees, 8% of production, 10% of post-production. And that would make these numbers at the bottom not quite add up if somebody was just running it through a calculator. And to me, that told me at what level of detail do they want to work. If they've noticed that, then I am willing to defend every single number in here because I went through the process of looking at what it was actually going to cost me. But that told me that I was in the bean counter world and not the person who wanted to make the video world. So that's how I handled these kind of things. Same basic process.
All right, let's head into our questions.
Tlaloc, Miguel Lopez Waterman is up first. When you gain a bit of runway budget-wise from the actions of a team member, how do you compensate and incentivize that action from them?
Good one. Courtney.
Well, you could give them a raise, and or you could, if it's a team member that supplies some of their own equipment, like a lot of times a boom person will provide their own boom pole and or headphones and sometimes cables, is give them a box rental. You know, give them a little check, you know, an extra $50 a day, $100 a day, something that can go toward their equipment that they can include toward their box rental. And this is something that can incentivize them to do the good job and give them a little extra bump without necessarily raising red flags to the client that you're paying this person more than scale or something in that respect. So you can keep them at a level that is commensurate with everybody else who's bidding on the same project, and yet be able to keep them, retain them because you give them a little extra bump. And make sure you pay them overtime. Make sure, you know, there are state laws. The Labor Relations Board governs in most states, governs the minimum wages and when overtime must be paid. And if you say, okay, we're just hiring you for your day rate, and you go 19 hours on that day rate, well, that's no good. You have to compensate and budget for paying overtime after the required state law if you're not under a union contract. If you're operating under a union collective bargaining contract, you can that supersedes the state law. So you can make a deal under a bargaining agreement to pay overtime after 10, let's say, instead of 8 hours. But those union wages take into consideration the cost of the talent and don't lowball the people, and compensate them greatly for any overtime hours after 8 or after 10, and then after 12, they can get astronomical. So you can compensate people and make sure that you're always pay them on time, and within 2 weeks if you're paying your team members. Make sure you don't wait until the client pays you. Have enough buffer money in your accounts to be able to pay your payroll within 2 weeks, which is the state law requirement, even if your client doesn't pay you for 60, 90 days. So you have to be able to have enough float to carry the employees.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that we do is we keep hiring the same people. so I don't know if I think that trying to incentivize every little thing that someone does is very difficult because it creates an inflation of expectation. If you can't do it on this one, because you might have gained something by what they did, but then lost something somewhere else in the production. And, it's very hard for you to, make that all, maybe they did something great, but now you're in a loss if you incentivize that specific action. I will say that for the most part, my crews, I do everything I can to keep my crews the same. So once I start inviting people to a crew, if I'm happy with what they did, I'll just keep hiring them over and over again. And at least they get the first call. Like they get, hey, they'll get a text, are you available? Are you available? And there's a list that I definitely have that is, I want to fill my crew with the same people. And part of the reason that I fill my people with the same people is they're always figuring that out. They're always saving me a little bit of money. They're always bringing a couple extra things. They're always, the people who end up on my crews are always like doing whatever it takes to get it done. And the result is that I don't hem and haw. I don't think I give people too much of a tweak on how much I charge, how much I pay them, and I also try to take care of them when they're on set. And then I also, they're the first call for everyone. And I think that's all I expect is I don't expect anyone to give me something because I figured out a way to save them a bunch of money. I just expect to get hired again.
And just pulling in the comments, Mickey says that the company's income is already spoken for, so I give at least 50% of the amount saved to them. And for me, as has already been said, is, the perks of, yes, not only working again, but if it is like adding, giving gift cards, is it food? And I should have prefaced this by saying it depends, like how much was the cost savings from the client. But really, as Alex, I think that was an excellent point, is hiring people over and over, because the same people, I should say, over and over, because what that says to them, like I even got a text, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, just out of the blue, just like, Liberty, thank you so much for always like thinking of me for projects. And this is even when I say, oh, they didn't decide to go with us, but they're still grateful because they know that this is going to be a great environment to be in. So if that is making sure you give them some bonuses, some extra, and or just treating people well, like be a good human, that always helps. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Eduardo Augustine in Panama. Read through the book Profit First and restructured my mindset on budgeting and handling money in business, my very small project. Has anyone else found Profit First valuable? Oh, that should have been read, not read. Sorry.
Alex?
I haven't, but I downloaded the audiobook. I'm awash with credits right now, so I will. I'm gonna. It looks like a good book from the surface.
Bill?
I wonder if it's a riff on, there was an old class I took from a CPA back when I starting out, and they were always saying, pay yourself first. If you don't look to protecting profit as you're growing a business, it's super easy to do some of the things Alex mentioned and be so focused on customer service that you end up at the end after a 3-day shoot and you find out you made $150. And that's just a bad thing to do. That you will not sustain yourself in business if you don't protect your profitability at every stage.
Guy?
Yeah, I read through the book and I was excited about it at first, but then when they started saying to create all these accounts, and I talked to our accountant and they're like, you want to create how many more accounts? You know how much that's going to cost to reconcile these additional accounts? And all it's doing is it's shifting some of your money from the bottom back up to the top to allocate it somewhere else for later. So it's kind of like it's more of a budgeting thing where your profit's your profit. I mean, no matter what, it's just what do you want to do with it? So general accounting practices, though, don't involve what that book recommends to do. And so we found that we couldn't implement it into our company because it's not normal. If you want to budget, then take your profit and move it to create some other accounts. Personally, if you're the one who's the owner of the account or the owner of the business, you can start to take that profit and move it towards future investments or dictate how much you want to pay yourself or leaving the company or whatnot. But yeah, I struggled with that book because the first couple of chapters were like, great, this is going to be awesome. We're gonna shift some stuff around. It's going to be great. But then at the end of the day, it was like, no, this doesn't work in the real world.
Yeah, I co-signed +100 what Guy said. I was like, I think I read that, and I looked up my Audible, and I did. And I think what the book does well is help if you are a solopreneur, if you're just getting started, to think about how and where your money should go. So yes, creating that account, maybe that where you put some of the profit so that you have your taxes, ready for your taxes. So come year end or however it works for you, that money is allocated. So I think that's where the book shines from that perspective. And then also just thinking about, yes, having the mentality that you should be making money so that you can redistribute it to your company. But then the actual execution of some of those things, I'd love to hear what you have to say, Eduardo, once you finish reading it. Next question.
Next one from Eduardo again. This time he says, which are the best efficient budgeting methods for a business? And he's noting he's not a financial expert.
Alex?
As soon as you start making any real money, get an accountant. like get someone who's going to do this for you. That's the most efficient way to do that. And it won't, oftentimes you're not hiring them full time. You just have an accountant that you can be looking at your books there and making sure that you're keeping track of everything that costs something that you're spending money on. The closer you can get to real-time understanding of where your money's going, as well as projections. The biggest mistake I made with my last company is I just didn't, we were so busy so much of the time that we weren't really making projections on, well, we have this much cash, this is how long it'll last, and this is what we're doing here, and this is what we have coming through here. and it kind of caught up with us a little bit, and so, because we just, for a decade, it was just money was just rolling, and it was hard because most of our work was all booked 2 weeks out. so it was, so it was it was like driving 90 miles an hour behind a Mack truck, like 10 feet behind it, and so we didn't do a lot of projections, but I would definitely, when we started looking at those projections, and we started looking at analyzing what things that we did made money, it was very clear. It was too late for my company to do this, but it became very clear that, these are things we should have been doing more of. This is stuff we shouldn't have been working on, and being able to really analyze what those are. I'm not very good at spending much time on it. When I finish a live event, I never want to think about it again. I'll do a postmortem, and then I just want to throw it off the bit. But you need to have somebody, maybe that will be you at the beginning, to analyze, like, how much did we actually spend and how much did we actually make on that. So you can get a sense of it. And where did we make money and where did we lose money? It's really important.
And Bill.
And there's also just, you talk to any accountant, and one of the reasons to talk to them is they'll tell you, are you losing economic clout by being the wrong form of business? Most of us starts out as sole proprietors, and we're just taking the income personally. But eventually you may find out that you're doing enough with big equipment rental and things like that you want some more protections of being a limited liability company, or maybe even eventually getting to the corporate form. Each of those requires a different set of mind processes. If you're a corporation, for example, if you don't hold monthly meetings and the rest of that, they can do what's called piercing the corporate veil and come after your personal assets, which is one of the primary reasons you want to be in a form like a corporation or a limited liability company. So they can't come and take your house if you have a big production go south on you and you end up with debt from it. So there's just a lot of stuff to be talked about in there. And budgeting isn't just about getting the job done. It's also about keeping your company healthy with the right products and insurances and things, so you don't make a tragic mistake like that and lose everything.
A healthy business. I like that, Bill. Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada said, when budgets get tight on a project, where do you look first to cut costs? Alex?
So a lot of times the first thing that I look for is where the number of days that we had, first thing you do is the number of days that you're doing in pre-pro or other things like that. And you really have to communicate to the client, or maybe if you're the client, talk to yourself a little bit quietly, or everyone else, they'll send you to an institution. But but you want to, think about the number of days that you're doing that. Think about, a lot of times our initial budgets will be, this is exactly what we need to do it. Then we go, well, we might pull back on the number of people we have here or there. One of the interesting things that I think is funny is that a lot of people will cut the PAs. It's like they'll cut the PAs, and I'm like, the PAs aren't that expensive. Like, they are the oil that runs. It's like not having your PAs is like running an engine without any oil. Just so you have all these people that you're paying a lot of money to, and now they're running out to get Now you have someone you're paying $1,200 a day running out to get lunch because you didn't want to pay the $300 a day to have the PA there. So it's so you want to be careful of not cutting out things that make everything work. But typically we start talking about the number of production days with a client. If we're working with an external client and we're tight on budget, we have some pretty hard conversations about what the cost of lowering that number is. So this is what this could mean. This is what, we're not making the budget, but this is what this can cost if we don't do this thing. And these are the things that can go wrong. Do that in email. And of course, we tend to call that a CYA email. These are all the potential things these are all the potential things that could go wrong if we cut the budget here, or we've now asked to be doing too many things and we don't have a budget for what you want. This is where we're going to cut, and these are the risks that come with that.
Courtney?
Scheduling is another good way to look at the schedule. A lot of people will just do their budget based on, okay, we're going to have this many people on a 10-hour day, and this is going to be the cost of that. And not everybody needs to work that full 10 hours. And so if you're careful about scheduling, you don't necessarily need to have your sound mixer in at 7 a.m. when they're loading in the set and building and lighting it. They're going to be sitting around, and you're going to be running into overtime on them at the end of the day because you had them come in at the beginning of the day when there really was no work for them to do. So talent, you don't want to schedule talent to come in too early, and especially if they're quick through makeup. You got to be careful about that. You got to consider if you're dealing with female talent, the makeup's going to take longer. You have to have them come in earlier so that you're not adding overtime hours at the end of the day because you waited 3 hours and the crew sat around on their hands for 3 hours at the beginning of the day because the talent came in too late and had to sit in 2 hours of makeup. So you have to be very careful in knowing what amount of time, what jobs take, and when to schedule them. So look at your scheduling fairly closely and don't just schedule everybody on a flat 10 or a flat 12 and consider that that's what's going to make your budget. You're going to end up paying a lot more overtime if you go over those flat fees. And so scheduling is helpful.
Bill?
Another big one for me has always been scope of work. If we have an agreement, if you've going to make this training program and we will have scripted it and we're looking at 10 different areas to talk about, I would sit down and go, listen, if you really don't have the budget, let's cut it down. Which ones can you lose so we get down to 8 or 7 or 6 areas of influence? And then maybe I can figure out, rather than making all the location changes that I had planned for in a store, maybe we can swivel around and this will be acceptable without doing a strike and reset in another department, because that usually takes a couple of hours, depending on whether you can run 1 or 2 crews. There's just 100 ways to look at what you can do, but you have to have command of exactly what you're shooting when in order to be able to adjust that. If you just literally are walking in and saying, we're just going to shoot something, this never works. And you're going to find yourself spending way more money on everything than you should.
Yeah, and I co-sign. We look at cutting down, if possible. Is it something like where it's days that we can cut down? If it's really, really tight, then is it someone who's a little bit more junior, so still director or whoever the leads are, but can we bring some more junior people in? And or is, if the client is like, no, this is the hard budget, then we then talk to them about, okay, possibly changing the scope of the project where it's like the output is different. Again, if it is a hard change in the budget. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked the opposite. When a small increased outlay can significantly improve a client's project or event, how do you convince the client to commit to it when they are reluctant?
Alex?
A lot of that comes with trust, with that they know that you're really not trying to just upsell them on something new. You don't want to be a used car salesman about your project. And so you don't want to do that. A lot of times we will, it depends on the increased outlay, but a lot of times I'll throw something in to make it work. Now we'll charge for that the next time, but if they like it, but a lot of times I'll throw things in that make it better. I won't do that for any significant, but the lens explanation that I had earlier is an example where, I look at what is going to, especially if it's a project that may end up on my demo reel or may end up in something that I show people or may end up in something that other clients, other people in that group may look at. I'm going to maximize the output of the event because it's a unique opportunity. And so I will, within reason, spend into things to make sure that they are just right. But I do it within reason, and I don't do it at a loss. I usually do it at a lower margin.
Yeah, Alex, that was a perfect word of like trust, because this is, and that goes back to even the kind of clients that you are working with. Just looking, is this the kind of client that you're going to have repeat business with and you're building a relationship? Then yes, I will bite the bullet where necessary. But then if this is that, and you did say a small increase, so it's a matter of showing samples and showing them people, I can show you better than I can tell you. So where I can show you, this is what happened on this project, this is what happened there, and explaining to them what this small, what the small increase can do, that typically will help. And or finding a stakeholder that can help us in the conversation, that is always helpful too.
Just to put it in perspective, there are 3 or 4 projects that I lost money on. Not a lot, but I lost money on, and they set the foundation for my last whole company. like literally, So and I could see them as an opportunity. I could see that the client wasn't ready to spend what was necessary, and I spent into it, as a risk. But I looked at it as a marketing budget. I don't I don't pay for marketing, so I don't run ads. I don't do other things like that. I market by doing a great job, and so sometimes I'll just say, well, that's my marketing budget. And that's what I want that project to do well. And it usually has to do with the subject matter. It has to do with who's in front of the camera. It has to do with whether I think it's achievable within a reasonable amount, that type of thing.
Yeah, and what you're saying is at the end, it's your brand. Your name is on this. People are going to see this work. So just that's a great way to think of that as well. Go ahead, Bill.
I shorthand this into either sell it, eat it, or give it up. Though it's a simple thing for me. If I really believe this is going to help, I will try to sell it. I will only go to a limit. And then once I get to the feeling like I can get any pushback from the client, I will either eat the cost to show them that I was giving them the best advice I could and it makes a difference, or I will give it up. And you try to get past that phase as quick as you can and move on with the stuff that really matters for the shoot.
Very good point. It's relational. Next question.
Next one comes from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. How do you budget for shrinkage, the phenomenon of unplanned loss of efficiency, like the 2 hours Alex needs because life happens?
Alex?
You do everything you can to budget for it. Like you just try to, and a lot of it has to do with saying no. So like I am pretty, I guess I would say I'm notorious about like, if someone has to do something at a certain time, especially an external, so what I find the most problematic is external partners or other people that were brought in to work on this on a project that I'm on, not being conscious to what my needs are, and taking more time than what I gave them. And I'm super clear about what they have available to them. And I am, I started, and I've been doing this for 30 years. I used to be a DJ and I used to walk up to the photographer and say, you're getting paid for something that happens after the wedding. I'm getting paid for what happens during the wedding, and I have the mic. So I'm going to tell you exactly when this is going to happen, and you need to be ready. Don't come to me and tell me that you don't have your batteries ready or your flash ready or your right lens on. I'm going to give you 10 minutes of warning, 2 minutes of warning, and then I'm going to go, and if you don't have the photos, that's your problem, and I'm pretty much haven't changed for 30 years is that I tell external contractors that are coming in like, hey, you've got an hour to do this. And I mean an hour, and so like, I'm not, and so I do everything I can to, and but the key there is you have a bunch of pre-pro discussions about it. You have a bunch of emails about it. You warn them half an hour before that you're coming in, 10 minutes before, and then you hand it to them and you say, okay, now this is what, but almost all the shrinkage you're talking about comes from people who you're not paying, who aren't accountable to you, taking up more time than they were given.
Courtney?
Know your crew and your director especially. Budget for how they operate, because I used to work with a commercial director all the time, and we'd always play Beat the Caterer. That he was so efficient and he knew what he wanted, and when he got it, we're moving on. He didn't shoot an extra 30 takes just to have them in the can. But then that got to be a problem. They would budget for that, and then the agencies would see us, wrapping at 12:30 before the caterer had even set up for lunch, and that happens 3 or 4 times. They're going to start adding spots to the same bid. They'll just write some more spots and expect you to shoot them for the same price as the one you bid on. So you got to be careful and not be too efficient for what you bid. And the way to know that is to know how the director works, because the director and the assistant director working together really drive the production and determine how fast that production is going to move from shot to shot, whether they're going to be satisfied with what they have, that they're going in, they know what they want, they've explained that to the crew. The crew has good storyboards, they know where the director's going, so that there are no surprises and no setbacks that are going to take a lot longer to set up and accomplish, because nobody was informed until they got there on the day.
And Bill?
If you're in charge and running a set, your single biggest skill that you can have is decisiveness, in my opinion. You have to, when something goes wrong and it can mess up efficiency, you have to analyze and make a decision and execute the best one you can immediately. The people who really run into big overruns are the ones who decide, let's convene a panel and talk about this for 10 minutes. Now, sometimes as the decider, you do have to consult with somebody who might be more technical and say, can we solve this right now? And if we can't, how do we pull this out and put something in? but somebody has to be decisive in making these calls, or you will always end up sloppy on set.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. Films break down each scene to help determine the total production cost. What are the smaller units or logical breakpoints for other types of productions, maybe daily or hourly breakdowns?
Go ahead, Alex.
I mostly work in day rates. I make a calculation of what that day rate is. Now, I'll take into account that day rate may include some overtime that's related to that, but I usually try to keep it in day rates. But I do, and now when that day starts also is different. So like what Courtney talked about, we won't start people before I don't want them standing around, but their day may start later, and we pay attention to that. Like people are different call times all the time to make sure that we're not going into overtime where we don't have to. The big thing to understand, especially when you're talking about film production, is, wow, you don't really know. Like you get a pretty good idea, and you try to put enough into it that you can you have some wiggle room. But most productions that I've worked on for film, there's a lot of wow and flutter in the. You have good days and bad days, and you hope that the over average evens out for you, and that's a good person on a budget will get that right, and try to get as much detail into it as possible.
Bill?
To me, the smallest breakdown was setups. I looked really heavily at how many setups do I need in the store. If I'm doing, overall coverage, do I need to be in aquatics? Do I need to be at the register? How many times do I have to break down, move cameras, repower? And based on that, I'm going to determine whether I have a single unit or 2 units so that one can hop over the other one and be set up when the first one ends. You have different types of productions, but setups is my golden standard for how long and how complicated is this corporate shoot going to be. And
Courtney?
Yeah, I never break it down into an hourly rate, although I'll have producers come to me and say, well, we only have this celebrity talent for 2 hours, so we can't shoot over 2 hours. So what do you give me for that? Can you give me a half-day rate for those 2 hours? And I go, no, well, minimum is going to be the day rate. I will have a half-day rate if I know it can't go over a certain rate, but I still pay all the employees their full-day rate. I take the cut of the half-day rate, and the half-day rate is never half of what the daily rate is. It's about 75% of what the daily rate is. So I'll give them a little discount for a half-day rate, and if it goes over 4 hours, we go automatically to the full-day rate for everybody. And I always pay the employees an 8-hour day, even if they're only working 2 hours.
Yeah, and to add to Courtney's point of also making sure that that's documented, whether that's in the proposal or the invoice, so that if it goes over that time, that you've clearly spelled that out. So again, trust and communication with your client or the project manager. Next question.
Craig McFarland in Boston. What's your process to make sure your estimation process is producing an accurate budget, profit, and cash flow?
Alex?
You really need to get good at asking all the questions, like where is this, when is this, what do we need, how long is it going to be, what time is the show, what are we doing, and the hard part here is that you really have to know the project. The one thing that we don't do is usually the person building your budget is someone who has managed many of these projects and understands what those projects are, and then oftentimes there's a couple of us checking back and forth. So as an example, Shannon and I will work on budgets. One of us will do a budget, the other one will do it. And then the two of us will look at it and argue about it. Like, oh, that's not enough time. This isn't enough here. You forgot this here. Well, let's take this out. We don't really need that. And so but for hundreds and hundreds and actually over 1,000 projects, we've kind of worked through that process. And so you want to have a couple people, you always want a second person to look at it, if you can, to kind of think through a fresh eye on it. But it's really about getting detail out of the client, asking exactly what are we going to do here. And that can be a grind, like for just projects, like I've done software projects, and the budgeting session for the software for a software piece of software that we built was 2 4-hour sessions of us just going through what is the software going to look like before we could even get a rough budget. Because otherwise you just need to have that information or you're not going to be accurate.
Guy?
Yeah, I'd taken a course locally at the local community college that was called the Small Business Accelerator program, and there's other classes like this where you can get a mentor or a coach that'll come and look at your books with you, and ideally you have some peers that are not just in your industry, but in other industries. And one of the things that just fascinated me about this class as we went around the table was this: at the local library, this will cost you thousands of dollars if you were to get those reports. But if you go to your library, it's called First Research Data. You enter in your NAICS code, and what this data will show you for your industry. So every industry has its own unique NAICS code, but what they do is they take the Dun & Bradstreet data and they'll show the income statement. So you could see what the net sales were for a large, medium, small companies. So like small would be under 5 million in this. So I'm in the mail order that it's kind of old school terminology, but e-commerce. And so you can see what gross margins are, what the officer compensation is as a percentage of sales. So if you're doing X amount, you should be spending this amount, or people in your industry are spending this amount on advertising and sales. So you could see if you're in line. And so you might be oversized on like your property and plant equipment or your rent. These are really powerful to go through because you can see not only the income statement, but you can see the balance sheet as well for people in your industry. And there's lots of great data here, and it's all available for free at your local library. And again, it's called the First Research Data and Dun & Bradstreet.
And this may seem really simple, but it's looking back at your past budgets and seeing where you might have overshot or undershot something so that you don't make that mistake again. And Bill?
And I had, when I showed you this form earlier, you didn't see the final column, which is actual total. And for me, as we cut checks, we put them into one of those three categories for each client. And then at the end, I look at that number and see what did I actually spend versus what did I presume I was going to spend.
All right, next question.
Next question comes from me. In California, SB AB 5 had a huge impact on who's classified as an employee versus an independent contractor, and it's now being used as a model for other states. Can we address the ramifications of that, of these state legislatures making it impossible to use independent contractors the same way we did before?
Go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
You can still use independent contractors to some degree, but they have to be providing a service which includes equipment and personnel. And there's a lot of rules about you can't, the person hiring you as an independent contractor can't tell you when you're going to be there. They just have to say, here's the job, and the job has to be done by this date, and so on. If they're giving you time and location call times, things like that, then they can be classified as a employee. So you got to be careful about that. And once you are classified as the employer of record, rather than dealing with independent contractors, you have to collect, all the taxes. You have to pay payroll taxes. You have to pay your portion of the payroll taxes. And don't forget about insurance, because almost all employers are required to pay workers' comp or be covered by workers' compensation insurance for all their employees. Another thing to consider is if you're not working with independent contractors, is that they also require paid time off. Even on a part-time, if it's a one-day shoot or a 3-day shoot, they accumulate a salary for paid time off. It's a certain percentage of their daily rate. Mm-hmm. And you have to accumulate them for that particular person and pay it out once a year. So if that person works 20 times for you during the year, they accumulate vacation and holiday pay or paid time off or sick pay. And you have to pay that out at the end of the year if they haven't consumed any of that paid time off.
Next question comes from Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. There is budgeting for bidding purposes and budgeting for cost control. When should they be separated? Are there different skills needed for project sales versus below the line management?
Alex?
I really believe those should be merged. Those should be the same people that are doing it. The people who are bidding on it should be the same people dealing with the costs later. When you scale, that gets really hard. It really creates a huge bottleneck, and it's still the way that you want to try to do it. The producers who are doing the mistake that really that we see all the time as account execs going out and bidding on things that can't be done or can't be done for that cost.
Yes.
So because they don't know, and not because they're doing it on purpose, they just don't know. They're like, right. Oh, that seems simple. But like a producer will see one little line in a request, in an RFP, And I know that that's going to take a lot of time to do that one little thing. But someone who hasn't done it, hasn't been in the trenches, hasn't managed it, won't know that. And they'll go, oh, that seems simple. And they'll be on our side, they'll be like, that is not simple. Like that is not easy. And so I think it should be almost always the same people. And it's a very hard way to do work because it builds a bottleneck, but it builds the best budgets, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the worst way that you can, when dealing with your team, when you come back and trying to make them to do the impossible when it doesn't line up with the budget. Next question.
Paul Wallace has one of the seminal questions of our time: QuickBooks, FreshBooks, or Quicken, or?
Jason, real quick.
All right, say it with me now. It depends. If your business depends on COGS or cost of goods sold, you're almost always going to want to use QuickBooks. FreshBooks is kind of a little bit more diluted than that and cloud-based. Quicken is only for personal, if you were a single contractor. And then the or question mark, I'm going to leave that one blank.
And I'll just add that also speaking through that with your accountant, because they might have preferences or understanding of how that works with your particular business and how they reconcile your bank statements. So speak to your accountant if you've got one. And we did it. Oh, yes, we did it. I'm going to quickly just bring in Guy and Courtney.
I just wanted to say that we use NetSuite. It's super, super powerful. If you get to a certain level where QuickBooks starts, the database starts saying just puking. Oh, that's what we had. To put it lightly, they couldn't handle it anymore. So NetSuite by Oracle is the thing to look into.
Thanks. And Courtney, real quick.
I've been using QuickBooks for over 30 years, and my accountant yells at me every single time I do tax accounting because it doesn't do proper dual entry ledgers. Use QuickBooks, I guess. I've been using Quicken for home and business.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our producers for your great questions, and to our panelists for your insights, your stories, and your tips, and to our production crew who make all of this happen. Thank you all so much. And again, if you want to see what's happening the rest of the week, head over to officehours.global. And now we'll head into after hours for some more discussion, and we will see everyone next time. Bye. I feel like we should have had the Money, Money, Money song playing at some point.
Pink Floyd is always welcome.
Rights for that may be a little too high.
Yeah. Cha-ching sound effect.
Careful.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Guy.
Put it backwards.
There's our YouTube flag. Stop before takedown.
No one will be able to watch the credits.